Dear ladies and gentlemen, dear colleagues, I welcome you all to today's Transylvania Lectures entitled Generating Us and Them, the Psychopolitics of Inclusion and Exclusion. My name is Kato Balázs, I'm a student of the Matthias Corvinus Collegium. The Transylvania Lecture is a series of public lectures organized by the MCC with the scope of creating a platform for learning, debating, and exchanging ideas between various experts and the public. It is my pleasure to welcome our esteemed guests, Dr. Farhad Dalal and Dr. Anka Semyonka. Dr. Dalal is a psychotherapist and group analyst. He works with individuals, groups, and also organizations. For more than 30 years, he has been in independent practice, initially in London and currently in Devon. Dr. Dalal writes, lectures, and teaches in Britain, as well as internationally. His and his colleagues' latest endeavor is delivering group psychiatry training in India. He will be joined here today by Dr. Anka Semyonka, who is a lecturer in the Sociology Department and Vice Dean of the Faculty of Sociology and Social Work at Babelsberg University. She holds a PhD in Sociology and Social Anthropology awarded to her by the Central European University. She is also a researcher interested in organizations, work, and social critique. As a teacher, her most important mission is to transmit knowledge and information to her students. Moreover, she is keen on encouraging them to contribute to a more just world. Thank you all, and please enjoy the discussion. The floor is yours.
Thanks. I need to use this? Okay. So, hello everybody. Thank you for inviting me. I don't know who this old person is on here, but it's not me. So I'm going to be speaking from my context in the UK and the sorts of preoccupations we have there. So some of it will translate across to your country and what's happening here, and some may not. So I'll start with a story, which is that a colleague some years ago, she describes an experience that she's on the London Underground, on the metro, and she suddenly became aware that she was the only white person in the carriage. And when she became aware of this fact, she felt frightened and alone. And that's a very strange experience, because she was feeling alone in a carriage full of people. So what is going on there? How is it possible to have such an experience? Because she would describe herself as an open-minded liberal, and despite her sort of rational ways of thinking, she was surprised to find herself having this experience. So in a way, the talk is looking at different ways of this, how to examine this experience, different kinds of explanations for it. And I'll start with multiculturalism. So in the 1960s and 70s in Great Britain, multiculturalism had the belief that we feared that when we met somebody strange or different, we had because of ignorance, we had an experience of fear towards them. And on this basis, they suggested that the answer to the problem is education. So we find out about them, we get to know about their culture and their ways, and so once we get to, they become familiars to us. Once this happens, then we are less likely to treat them badly or fearfully. And so their strapline, their adage is, we are different but equal. We're different but equal. We accept each other in our difference. So there's quite a lot to, there's quite a lot of sense in that way of thinking. But it doesn't work completely. So for example, if you think about the relationship between men and women who share lives of intimacy with each other, it's not that they're ignorant of each other's culture. They are part and parcel of the same culture. And yet, women find themselves at the wrong end of things and whatever is happening is not because of ignorance. So something else is going on. So my colleague on the train, her unconscious and unspoken belief was that if she was in a carriage full of white people, she wouldn't have felt alone. And that also is somewhat strange, because this carriage full of white people would also have been strangers and holding presumably very different values and beliefs to her own. Yet somehow she thinks she would not feel so alone. So we could reverse that first question and ask, why is it she doesn't feel alone despite being surrounded by strangers? So that's the kind of multiculturalist perspective, right? Ignorance and education. Now, psychoanalysis thought differently. They said that the problem was a psychological one. It wasn't to do with knowledge. And at its simplest level, the theorization goes like this: that there's something about myself, some aspect of myself that I either fear or do not like, or so I disavow it. I cut off from it. I repress it. These feelings, let's say angry feelings, and I project it into some other person. And the thing is that this whole process is unconscious, and I don't even realize I am doing it. So the end result becomes that this anger that is really mine, I come to experience as lodged in some other person there, and that's an angry person. So this is my experience. Now, so this is the theory, so that the other becomes a receptacle for the aspects of myself I disavow. Now, so what psychoanalysis says is, because the problem is psychological, the solution must also be psychological. So if I come to know myself better, if I come to acknowledge and own these aspects of myself which I don't really want to know about, say my angry feelings, that I'm an angry person, if I can acknowledge this, then I won't have the need to project it into somebody else, and I won't have the need to then experience you as an angry person, right? I've solved the problem psychologically. So their solution is some form of therapy, as it were, self-knowledge. Now, this theory of projection, again, like the multiculturalist theory, there's something to it, but it only speaks at the level of individuals. It might explain why this particular individual has these sorts of experiences. What it cannot explain is how a whole population within a society comes to hold these sorts of feelings of, say, animosity and fear and so on about another group of people. How is it people's emotional lives become synchronized so powerfully? And another problem with this is, why is it that it's, say, black people that become the receptacles of these feelings and not nurses? And why is it in some contexts it's Protestants that become the repositories of these feelings, in another context as Muslims, in another context presumably Hungarians, Romanians, the Roma, whatever? How is it that the target keeps shifting? What else is something else is going on. So when these sorts of challenges are put to the psychoanalytic worldview, they answer that these social categories have already been socially sanctioned as deserving of denigration. So in other words, my internal mechanisms, they're exploiting something that's already existing in the social world. I'm exploiting that to manage my internal social world. But it's missed the point. The point being, how did these categories come to be socially sanctioned as deserving of denigration. So the main point they do not answer. They take it as a given and say the internal mechanisms exploit it. But how does it come to exist in the first place? Also, these sorts of theories don't really speak much about what happens to the disavowed aspects of the denigrated groups, so Jews, blacks, women, whoever. They also must be needing to project these things. Where do they put them? So these theories don't really engage with that too much, or at all even. So the difference and the similar. So the multiculturalists think that the problem is solved through knowledge of the other, and that's in the conscious realm and it's education. And the psychoanalyst thinks that it's solved by knowledge of the self, and the work is in the unconscious. So there are these two ways of thinking about it. But neither is sufficient, and nor is it full enough. Just to change the focus. In this area we talk, or people talk a lot about similarity and difference. But when we talk about similarity and difference, it is quite in the abstract, in a very generalized way. As though all differences or all similarities would evoke similar responses. So a stranger knocking at my door will evoke, I won't just have a response because the person's a stranger. I will have a response depending on the kind of stranger they are. Are they a black man in a hoodie, a white man, a young girl? It will also depend on where the door is, right? Is it in apartheid South Africa or in London? And it also depends on who is opening the door, because the person opening the door itself and the other, we are all in a meaningful social arrangement. So I'm saying that one can't leave the socio-political out of the analysis, like psychoanalysis, I think, tries to do. So animosity and anxiety and hostility are not an inevitable response to meeting a stranger. So here's another complication, which is that we are never just strangers to each other. We are also familiars. So to put it in this way, that between any of us there are multiplicity of similarities and differences at the same time, right? I am similar to you by virtue of one attribute, at least one attribute, and in the same moment I am different to you by at least one other attribute. So similarity and difference are not absolutes, they can always be deconstructed. So in this moment, do you experience me as similar to you, or do you experience me as different to you? Because you have a choice in a sense. And if you experience me as similar, what have you done with the differences? And if you experience me as different, what have you done with the similarities? And the big question, why? Why are you having this sort of experience rather than that sort of experience? Because in a kind of logical schema, both are available to you. This going back to the colleague on the train, one difference became so powerful in her mind, it erased everything else. She might have felt solidarity with, say, the women on the train, on the carriage, but this one thing erased everything else. Moving on to another way of thinking about her experience. In the 1970s and 80s in Britain, there came about a movement called anti-racism. And they disagreed with both the multiculturalists and the psychoanalysts. They accused the psychoanalysts, they say, you're just psychologizing the problem, right, internalizing it. And they said to the multiculturalists, you're just being naive if you think it is only ignorance. And they said the real issue is power and power relations. And they said rather than spending time educating the oppressors, let's call them, or psychoanalyzing the oppressors, what we need to do is to make changes to the social conditions. And they were militant, and indeed quite a lot of change followed out of it. There are also problems with their way of thinking, but the good thing was that they brought power, the notion of power into the issue, into how one thinks about these things. So I want to go back then to this sort of categorization process. So we tend to think that belonging is a kind of natural category, that we naturally belong here, naturally don't belong there. We know that notions of us and them are meaningful to human identity. They're critical. And critical to this experience of us and them is some difference between an us and the them. And it is this difference that's used as a differentiator from us and them. But as we just noticed a bit earlier, there are also, in the same moment, lots of similarities present. So back to that question, how do we come to settle whether this experience I'm having is, say I'm having with you, which is this an experience of similarity where we are an us, or is this an experience of difference where you are a them in some way? How do we draw the line? Where do we decide to draw the line? If I make it even more concrete, when is it the case that Mr. Smith is having an experience with a Mr. Patel, it's an experience of one of us, and when is it an experience of Mr. Smith having an experience of Mr. Patel where he's one of them, right? Not changing the language, when is one a cross-cultural event and when is one not? What role does prejudice play in all of this? And another question is, will Mr. Patel be allowed any say in the matter as to whether he's one of us or one of them? And this again is the issue of power. So we are all born into a world that's already divided. And so we come to think that these divisions are natural, and it is the case because it is a natural division. But when we do this, we're falling into the error. The philosopher David Hume, he talked about the error of deriving an ought from an is, meaning that we see something and we think this is the way because that's how it ought to be. And despite Hume having flagged this up, he made the same error where he looked at the world and he said, oh, women are in second-class positions in relation to men everywhere. That's how it is. It must be because they are inferior. That's how it is in the ought. And he thought the same thing about black people as well. So despite Hume having done this, he nevertheless produced the same error himself without noticing. So I'm arguing that human groupings are not simply found in nature, but they're made, and I'll say more about that in a moment. So I'm arguing that it's not the case that one finds a difference, which I have an emotional response to, rather that I find myself emphasizing a difference in order to create a differentiation, right? So I'm instrumentalizing a difference. Now the psychoanalyst, group analyst S.H. Fuchs, he claimed that there was a fundamental need for human beings to belong, to be part of an us, and that this is a necessary condition for psychological well-being. But even to put it in this way, to say that there's a need to belong kind of misrepresents the position, because it implies that there's a possibility of not belonging. We cannot not belong. Now, the attributes of humankind, they vary on a continuum, okay? Take color, height, whatever, it varies on a continuum. But then our minds break these up into bits and pieces. And the way our minds do this is, it sort of does this by playing a couple of cognitive tricks. So if I had, let's say, 20 sticks of different lengths and divided it up, I would make somewhere an arbitrary decision between these two sets. Having done that, my mind plays this trick where I come to experience each group. There's variation in the group, right? But I come to experience each group as more similar than they actually are. So it kind of gets flattened out. And the distance between the group, my mind tends to exaggerate. So this is the kind of cognitive mechanism that we are unconsciously employing all the time, even with sticks. Yeah? And we use something like that with people as well. It's in this kind of a way, cognitively, that we produce groupings of people. Then social psychologists have described a number of other strategies that we use to not only to create but to emphasize the differences between these groupings. And one of them is favoring the in-group. And they've done lots of experiments, and we naturally tend to favor the us group. So you're given some exercise, some choice, and the strategy seems to be unconscious to increase the distance between the two groups. That seems to be more important than like say there's something about money or something like that. Rather than in objective terms us being better off, it seems more important to increase the distance between the us and the them. And the emotions also come into play through the mechanisms of idealization and denigration. And idealization is the mechanism where we attribute from a minority of the best of us, we attribute that characteristic to all of us, from the minority of the best. And to them, we take the attributes or the characteristics of the minority of the worst of them to all of them. Again, these processes are all unconscious, and despite our capacity to think, we all end up doing these sorts of things unconsciously. And so we can now say about them, well, they're just lazy. They, in general, are lazy or thieves or this or that. So we can make these emotional generalizations on this sort of a basis. I need to say one other thing about the idea of belonging. Right? The idea of belonging only works if two conditions are fulfilled. One, there has to be something to not belong to. And the second thing is that not everybody can belong. Some people have to be excluded from this belonging group. Because without these two conditions, the belonging category becomes infinite and meaningless. So integral to the idea of inclusion is an idea of exclusion. It is there in the structure of inclusion and belonging, which creates problems. Then there's I would call it a semantic complication, which is just by using a name for a belonging group. For example, if I say English culture, I create the illusion of a homogeneity called English culture, or a unity. But as soon if I try to look into it, I don't find a similarity across it. I find huge, powerful divisions of politics, of values, faiths, from people being vegan to communist to capitalist. I can't use one term for it all because I just find differences within that thing. And so I can never name the essence of an us. It's not sufficient. It doesn't exist. And because of that, I think that we focus on the them, on that difference. And the virtue of doing that, by looking at them, I can have the comfortable illusion that we are actually a cultural group, a unified cultural group. So the focus on the them serves this function, I would argue, which is to create an illusion of a substantial us. There are violent disagreements between a royalist and a capitalist and a this and a that they're not all sharing the same sets of values that we could call English culture. The same is true of Islam, say, right? There's bloody battles between Shia, Sunni and Wahhabi. Christianity, Christians of one kind have been killing Christians of the wrong kind for centuries across the world. Hindu culture, right? The experience of Hindu culture from those of the lower castes is a completely different one from that of the Brahmin and the higher castes. So one can't talk about Hindu culture as a piece either. So I made that point. So because of these differences, I can't get a hold of an identity, so I look at what is not me, what is not us, focus on that. So maybe this is the punchline of my paper, of this talk, which is this: there's nothing intrinsically different about the difference that we think makes a difference. Right? Whether it is color, religion, there's nothing intrinsically different about it. It's the use we put it to. Right? But it's also true that, whilst it's true that human groupings are made, not found, once they are made, then they come to have a very powerful, they come to become very powerful psychosocial realities that are embedded in us, that become meaningful to us, and so on. So it's not like these are just they are in a sense figments of imagination, but once they take shape, then they become, in a sense, oddly material. So to bring power into the discussion again, it is the more powerful the people who already have, who have the capacity to name. So some people have the capacity to name, other people find themselves named. It is the more powerful who have the capacity to call a killer their killer, a hero, a soldier and a patriot, and the capacity to call another killer their killer, a murderer and a terrorist. Now, changing disciplines, going to sociology. There's a sociologist who's not very well known called Norbert Elias, and he wrote some amazing things. I'm just going to draw on his thinking now. So one of the things Norbert Elias did, he in Britain, he studied a town in the north of England where there had been some people settled there for some generations. He called them the established. And then some other people after the war came and settled in this place, and he called them the outsiders. And looking from the outside to us, we would see no difference between them. Religion, color, whatever, values and whatever, we would find it very hard to distinguish between them. But the established, the ones who already had a means of producing and retaining a division between the us and the them. And the mechanism, I'm just going to talk about one mechanism that he talks about is gossip, right? Gossip. And he describes that there are gossip mills, like, flour mills, gossip mills. And the job of the gossip mills is to feed gossip that shows us in a good light and them in a bad light, and screen out stories where we are in a bad light, right? So that this gossip then starts to create psychological realities. And because the established have been there a long time, their channels of gossip, if you like, are well established. So their gossip can flow, and work quite powerfully. Whereas the outsiders, they haven't had time for this to happen, so they are much more fragmented. And if you like, their gossip mills are much less efficient. They don't function as well as the gossip mills of the established. And it's a whole process of stigmatization and attributing charisma to the self. So if you like, these gossip mills are also patrolling. They work also as a form of social control. So when one of us crosses the line and starts engaging with one of them, the gossip mills get active about that as well. And this person then starts becoming marginalized and paying the cost by, in a way, becoming excommunicated from the group. I'll quote a line here from Elias. He says this creates an emotional barrier between us and them, and it's so powerful that it's very difficult to move across. So he says this emotional barrier accounts for the often extreme rigidity in the attitude of the established groups towards outsider groups, right? And the etiology is different. It's not that the emotional barrier causes a division, but the emotional barrier is constructed in order to sustain the division. And the psychological consequences of this are very powerful. So much so that the denigrated groups come to take on the image of them given to them by the more powerful group. And I'll read one more quote here. The powerful impose on newcomers the belief that they are not only inferior in power, but inferior by nature to the established group. And this internalization by the socially inferior group as part of their own conscience and self-image powerfully reinforce the superiority and the rule of the established group. So the outsiders come to believe that they are in the second-grade position because they are not as good as the more established. So to end with, I'll just make some points about culture. So one of the tenets of liberalism is that we should respect and accept other cultures on their own terms and not judge them from our perspective and values. And that's the basic tenet of liberalism, right? Live and let live. But as we've already seen, cultures are not unities, right? There are differences and difficulties and contradictions going on within cultures. It's also the case that what these cultural cultures tend to explain, for example, why it is only men that should become priests, because it is our way. Only men should become priests. Why the genitalia of women should be mutilated, because it is our way. Why one kind of person is entitled to resource and another kind of person is not. Why I am deserving of it and why you are not. So the thing I would say is that one cannot divorce culture from politics and power. Cultural practices and beliefs are, amongst other things, institutionalized rationales of domination and oppression. It legitimates certain forms of oppression, and you have to accept it because it's our way, right? If you don't accept it, then you're an imperialist. So I would say cultural practices are sedimented power relations, and they got structured into a culture. And perhaps the most vivid example of this, although there are many, is the caste system in India. So what is the consequence of this? It seems I cannot simply then just respect their culture. I will be respecting one aspect of their culture, say the values of the Brahmin, but in the same moment I am disrespecting some other element of that culture. So I can't do this naive thing of just accept their difference. I cannot, similarly, there's no one spokesperson for the Islamic community or the Jewish community. There can only be spokesperson for particular interest groups, and each of them will be in conflict with each other. So I cannot simply just tolerate difference. I have to decide I have to make an ethical decision about which difference I support or accept. But in the same moment, I will be not accepting some other aspect of their culture. So the exercise of tolerance requires the engagement of one's discriminatory processes and your own ethical sensibility. So tolerance is not the opposite of discrimination, and indiscriminate tolerance of the kind that the diversity movement tries to foster on us today, I would say is dangerous nonsense. I think I've probably spoken enough. Thank you. Okay.
Sorry about that. Thank you very much for your talk. It was very enriching. Okay, this is the right distance. It was a very enriching world that you suggested to us, with so many ways of unpacking something that it's oftentimes so well packed into just difference and racism and discrimination. You've unpacked a very productive, I think, series of ideas that we can that we can discuss. And I would like to ask you to take maybe your speech so far one step further. I'm curious, starting from the town of that Elias was describing, with the established and the outsiders. I would like to ask you to talk to us a bit about what are the implications of the type of perspective that you described to us for, let's say, people from that town who would like to avoid the differences between the established and the outsiders to become a very negative and very strong, very solidified problem. So the multiculturalist would say educate them both parties about the specificities of the other. The psychoanalyst, as you said, would maybe invite to a better self-knowledge, maybe a better acceptance of our negative parts, so that the need to project on others is not so high. So you brought in at least two elements, the one of power relations, and the one of the arbitrarity of the difference that's being chosen to matter. What would be some implications of this perspective for the possibilities of simply creating a better life in that city? I mean, I think many of the people here are concerned about activism, right? We want to, I mean, not to fight, but to diminish the negative aspects of these phenomena. So how would you take
Maybe you've already answered it with the word activism, because in the sense that the ones who are privileged do not readily give up their privilege. I think there has to be, it's got to be strong. It's not going to be through cozy conversation. There's going to be struggle and some kind of a fight, I think, probably is the case. And I mean, for, you know, in maybe try and come at it another way, things like multiculturalism and anti-racism, even though people know something like multiculturalism, they companies and so on would say, yes, this is a good idea, but they wouldn't follow through on it, because if the cake, as it were, is finite, then you know, if I have to give you some of my share, I'm going to get less. So I'm very reluctant to do that. What happened in the 90s is that a new movement started up called the diversity movement, you know, which is we include everybody and everything. And the diversity agenda was a kind of a neoliberalist agenda, because it said that if you include the other, you know, the dark folk, what will happen is that the cake itself will get bigger. The neoliberalist idea that the cake itself will get bigger, and so everybody will get more, even the more privileged. So today you find multinationals embracing the idea of diversity, but it's really a kind of a self-centered reason that they embrace it. So, I mean, it's an interesting question you asked me, and I don't have an answer for it, to be honest. But I cannot see anything being given up easily by the people who already have privilege, that there has to be a fight about it in some form. And in Britain, even though there are, you know, since the 1950s, there are very powerful legislation, anti-racist, anti-discriminatory legislation, but little change actually is seen in society, you know. So headlines, and this is an actual headline from a few years ago, they say 10,000 professors in universities in Britain, only 50 are black, for example, you know. The gender thing, I think, is moving more quickly. So I don't know the answer, but maybe somebody in the audience has some thoughts about that question. Or not. Do you have a thought on that?
I actually have a curiosity. So one of the openings I saw in the way you framed the problem, but only if we keep it to a smaller scale problem, like the one of a town or of not like a whole country.
Yeah.
But what you started off from talking about the infinity of similarities and differences that are actually there between any two people at any given moment, and then these newcomers, these outsiders in this town, would it in any way help if the similarities were somehow more forcefully made visible? Because if the mechanism of gossip, which is a very micro level mechanism, can have such a power, does an anti-gossip that actually shows similarities, would that also? But
that's like the multiculturalist thing, that you're educating and saying, look, they're the same as you, or, you know, in that sort of a way. Because of the problem really isn't the difference. The problem is my privilege and my reluctance to share my privilege. So even if we have all these similarities, I don't care about that. I've got a bigger slice of the cake, and I legitimate why I keep the larger slice of the cake by positioning you in that way. So you're sort of saying a rational argument will.
But maybe not a rational argument, but something that has to do with actually people understanding the way they could, maybe their similarity would maybe put them in a position that would create solidarity. So for instance, I'm thinking the gender solidarity when the division is a race one, and then you can, by the fact that you recognize the other person who is maybe of a different race but is also a woman, this could potentially maybe diminish or dissolve some of this strength that the initial difference had.
Yeah, I mean, I agree with you that you're talking about some kind of humanizing process.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah,
maybe yes.
That, but it's. I'm just thinking out loud now. But the way you're putting it, I think it's saying that it is because I'm experiencing them in a dehumanized way, I'm treating them like this. So that's a sequence, whereas I'm suggesting maybe it comes the other way, that I dehumanize them in order to exploit them.
I would very much agree that that's the order.
Yeah.
I'm just thinking maybe the ease or the speed with which you can dehumanize the other person and let that difference be instrumentalized further. This probably also. Yeah.
But if you think about the horrors of war, or what's going on between now in Israel and Palestine, you know, we don't need to explain that. Oh, that's a human you're killing. You know, it's. I don't quite know how to put it, but there's something else going on, and looking at similarities and differences, maybe looking in the wrong place for the solution. I don't know, honestly. I don't have an answer to it.
Because I'm thinking that, for instance, the type of mobilizations and solidarities around "we are all mothers," like mobilizing against war on the shared identity of being mothers of children being sent to war. So, not as a solve-it-all solution, but as one of the things that could be done.
I agree with that. That does make that. When you put it like that, that does make sense. Yeah,
okay. And then I have another. Maybe my last question is somehow in the same no, I have two questions. Sorry, in the same direction. Although I can kind of guess your negative answer to it. Do you think people who have more structurally more fragmented identities because they simultaneously belong to more categories, do you think that it could be, is it conducive to being less vulnerable to this type of divisive mechanism? So someone who identifies, who can't easily identify with one race or another, or maybe gender or ethnicity, are the people who are structurally more plural in their identities less likely to fall prey to the mechanisms that you describe, or that's also too superficial of a level?
I don't know. I think, for example, you know, like, again, to come at it from a slightly different direction. So in when they do a census in the UK, and you're asked to tick your ethnic identity, you know, so you have white, British, this, that, and the other, and then they've got a category which is mixed race, and I think that's a problem because it suggests that there is such a thing as a pure race. So the way what you're talking about, people having multiple identities, I think at some level that's true of all of us. And one can pick out particular ones, like say mixed race or mixed ethnicity or heritage, whatever the terminology is. But you are a fractured human being in that way. You know, you're a mother or this or that. politics. There are many belonging groups that you are a part of and I'm a part of, and the values of some of my belonging groups are in conflict with another belonging group that I am a part of. So I'm already a conflicted being, I think. So what you're saying about the special group, I think applies to all of us. I'm not answering your question at all, but I'm saying there's something before that complicates it. And then how does it come to look like you, say, are of just one category, but I'm of 5 different categories, you know? That already is a kind of an illusion that's produced, where it seems like one person is just one thing, and I'm, or whoever, is several things. But it could be that it will make me more open, or it could be that I become more rigid through that process. We made an agreement you wouldn't ask me any hard questions. And you let me down, betrayed me.
I'm not sorry. I have one last question. I'm very much drawn to this type of arguments that show the power of who gets to do the naming in these situations, and I was wondering how you see the type of so you have 2 categories that are constructed by some discourses and practices as being fundamentally different in the way you explain, by really maximizing the difference, let's say men and women. In a patriarchal system, it is the male position that has very often the power to name the traits of the dominated category, which in this case would be the woman. How one of these features could be, let's say, I'm taking just one example, women are emotional, which is oftentimes used as an instrument to justify why women are not in power position. We all know we know the drill. How do you feel about the reaction that this empowered group can have towards these definitions? Because what some of the feminist movements, for instance, try to do is to say, but being emotional is good.
Yeah.
So they accept the difference, but they try to switch the value that's assigned to their category. I have the feeling, so my personal take is that this is not leading to good outcomes. And I was wondering whether you think such a process could be ever successful, in which you keep the categories that were assigned to you, the features that were assigned to you, and then you really reverse the value, and then you.
It's the case that strategy has been used by lots of different groups, haven't they?
Yes.
So black is beautiful, for example, can become a thing. That sort of reversal where the thing that's denigrated, you turn it around and you make it your emblem, and you fight on that basis. It is problematic because the emotional thing, because it's still buying into the binary, isn't it? That we women are the emotional ones, but this is a good thing, unlike you men. So it's still buying into the binary. So again, the work has to be maybe below that, or at a meta level. I mean, it must. I think, in terms of a political movement and a process, it might have a place in the thing, you know. So you have women's groups that gather together to be together, but then later on, once changes happens, maybe that can then, it served its purpose and it can disperse itself. Not a very satisfactory answer.
No, actually it is. I think it's because it still does something to de-internalize the negative identity that you could be, that you are asked to have. So it is an opposition.
Yeah, I mean, recently I've just come across this ethical stream that's probably very familiar to you, but I've only just discovered it, called the ethics of care. And so that's been generated by women, but the problem with that has been in some quarters is that it's been portrayed as a women's ethics, and it's about women caring, and this is different to your men's ethics. So it keeps a division going. That's not how all the people, that's not the only way that's developed, but that's one of the ways it's gone into a cul-de-sac. So it becomes a second-rate ethics. The main ethics, the man's ethics, the justice ethics.
Okay, thank you very much. I think it's a good time to open the floor to the questions from the public.
Yeah, I don't know if you would be open to this, but as a group therapist and group analyst, we like to make circles of people. Would you be up for moving your chairs and for us to sit in a circle so it's not so much question answer but a conversation between all of us? Would that be too radical a move? Can we do that? Yeah? Thanks. So we can rather than think of it, I mean, sure, question answer as well, but you know, we can all think together with about this stuff and talk with each other as much as with us, if you know what I mean. So a space for us to speak. Questions?
Okay, we have a question. We've talked quite a bit about gender. Because of the recording, we might need to use the microphone. So we've talked some about gender disparities, but so a question came to mind about national differences. What do you think, and this is probably a question for everyone, but what do you think makes one nation more inclusive than the other? And the example that I would like to give is the Americans. So the US is generally thought of as a nation that's very welcoming to immigrants, as opposed to like Japan, which is much more closed, much more reticent about accepting immigrants and any other kind of nationals into their society. So what do you think the main reason would be behind this?
Shall I? I think I don't recognize the America you're talking about, firstly, and even when they did welcome immigrants, it was only certain kinds of immigrants, and other kinds of immigrants were not welcomed, right? And don't forget, one kind of immigrant was called a black slave. There was a huge debate in the 19th century about the Irish. What kind of immigrant were they? Were they actually white or black? There was an idea that the Irish were black, and if they were white, then they would be welcomed in. And so the idea of America being welcoming is also too. I don't think it is the case, and moreover, the ones who were arrived there, they made it more difficult for other generations to arrive. So it's not, anyway, genuinely, it's not my reading of America as the sort of welcoming thing in that way. And I understand what you're saying about Japan, and that is the case, but I don't think America is the opposite of Japan in that sense. I don't know what other people think.
Yeah, but what's the question? If it's not America, then what else? You know? Why is there a difference is your question.
Yeah, so basically what you're saying is that, is this working? So what you're saying is that maybe they publicize themselves in that way, maybe for economic or for whatever other reason, but on a micro level that's not really the case.
Yeah, I mean, you know, Trump building the wall, is not welcoming. You know, it's the wrong kind of immigrant. You know, we would like like Britain is very anti-immigrant. We are, you know, sending gunboats out to push people back into the water and so on. But if you happen to have £50 million, you're welcome. So it's a certain kind of immigrant. It's not a generalised thing, I would say. It certainly isn't. You know, Britain is a country of shame, in my opinion, today, with what it's doing.
Right, thank you.
I have to give this away because I'll keep talking.
I would ask you then, if not America, then which country would be an example of like a good system of inclusion, or the least xenophobic, so to say?
Do you know of one?
No, I'm just asking.
Yeah.
Germany has prided itself.
Say more?
Give me that drink.
There was also, I mean, Germany has been seen as taking a lot of immigrants in, and it was sort of, and so the question was: is it because they needed workers, or is it because they felt guilty? So these were the kind of questions about why that was, and it created also quite a lot of difficulties, of course. But maybe it is always not just generosity. Generosity, yeah.
Different kind of question, but you mentioned these gossip mills, and the way you spoke about them, it seemed like you didn't really like their existence, or that's what I understood. Do you think that there are pros to these mills existing?
I think they exist. They exist full stop, and it isn't a small example. I was telling somebody I was coming here to give a talk and so on, and what she said was, I said about the Hungarian, you know, setup and so on, and she said, "Oh yeah, they're very stubborn, the Hungarians. They don't want to learn Romanian." Now that is an instance of gossip, right? When you hear that, somebody saying that, it sets something up in you. And then you might say something about the Romanian or so on. But it's at that very, you said micro level, you know, at the very micro level, these things are being, we're all doing it. Whether you know it, you're doing it. Whether I know it or not, I'm doing it. And my gossips are about my in-groups and out-groups, you know, certain kinds of psychoanalysts, I'll say bad things about them and so on. But we're all doing it. I think it's part of how our societies structure themselves. And more?
Just a thought, maybe their role is to help contain more information in a sort of smaller package, which then makes transaction of information more fluid.
Yeah, but is it information or is it fake news that's being transmitted down these things?
Gossip is not always bad. I mean, it has a certain helpful role as well.
Yeah. So the information would be the positive aspect of it. That's true. Oh, here we go. Take it. No, take it. No, because I'm not speaking anymore.
I'm somewhat of a lone wolf, so I don't like to discuss about groups and what groups can do, and radicalism and activism, especially in a structured way. What can a lone wolf do in order to diminish, to challenge all of these constructions that you both discussed about? I have a suggestion. I was wondering if somebody agrees with me, maybe not the experts, but the public. In my opinion, a radical change took place after my Erasmus program in Paris. And not only because I saw the world differently, but also because I understood what it's like to be discriminated just for being part of a certain nation, and understanding how horrible that is. So to put it in a very plain way, I understood how horrible it must be to be a Roma, because while being in Paris, I was a Romanian citizen. And just to say something interesting, the people who did not discriminate me were people who did not know me very well. And a Japanese girl is an example, regardless of financial mood and the culture and what we are accustomed to know. A Japanese girl and an Australian one. So that was my hint and my question regarding these exchange programs.
That's good, because you gave the question and the answer.
My answer.
Yeah, but more than that, you also said something about experiencing something that made you understand another group. And maybe that is a bit of the process of humanizing. It's just more than knowledge, isn't it? It's an experience of knowing what it's like.
I had a question
Yes.
about an answer.
Okay.
So should I give it back to him?
No, just
So, my voice. I remained with this question. At the beginning, you said that there is no such thing as a need to belong, because we all belong somewhere or another. And then I started thinking, if we don't have a need to belong.
No, I said we have a need to belong. I wasn't saying we don't have. I was saying we inevitably belong.
Oh, that we inevitably belong somewhere, so that then this need is satisfied. This is something, and maybe I didn't understand it well.
Yeah. So what is it you're wanting to say about that?
My question was, then why do we do all this?
Okay. So I like that lady over there, she was positioned in a belonging group by somebody more powerful, but not, not one that, so just because you're in a belonging group doesn't mean it's a good thing. You can be positioned in all sorts of belonging groups.
So then it's about power, mostly.
Power, yeah.
So it's not necessarily about our need to belong, but our power need, or...
Yeah, but I also need to belong, but I want to belong to a category that has prestige and status and resources, not, but I'm a part of many belonging groups. And so in this moment, which one feels more, useful to me or benefit to me?
Yeah.
You have something to say, I'm
But
sure.
a group is also empowering. I mean, there are two things. One is to be positioned, and the other is to look for a group that gives you a home or a sense of home.
Yeah.
So if we want to belong and we have this need to belong somewhere with somebody's, then why do we have this sort of embedded in our culture that the neighbor's lawn is always greener? So like this sort of self-sabotaging or thinking that the group that is not ours is sort of better. What is it actually, or why is this evolving if we want to belong to the most prestigious and the group with the most resources?
oddly or contradictorily, what happened, well, again, I can just talk about Britain, that the people who have a lot look at the refugees and they're jealous of the refugees. Look, they're getting fridges or they're getting houses and so on. So it's perceived as though they're getting more. But it isn't actually, there's something by envy here, isn't it? So that's happening. But even from a position of privilege, you can feel deprived. I don't know if I'm answering you. Does somebody else have a thing to say about the question? Do you agree with what she said?
I'm just thinking about this. I'm thinking out loud, so just stop me if you think I'm wrong. But whenever we do become jealous of people around us who are better off, that comes from the safety of us belonging to the same group, if that makes sense. So if we didn't belong to the same group as them, maybe it wouldn't even be an issue in the sense that that way the disparities would be so big that maybe the issues that we are jealous of would not even come up as a difference. Does that make sense?
Mm.
I want to think aloud about like being jealous of other groups, like you belong in a group and being jealous of another group. I think that in this social climbing, like if we take the sticks, like the different sticks with different heights, and we take the smaller group, and in the smaller group the tallest stick want to belong to the tall group. Even if he will be the shortest stick there, the belonging of the higher group, higher tier group, will bring a higher social standing.
Yeah.
Could you be more specific, like giving a real example without speaking about sticks, and if it would be okay with you to speak in this group about something more, you know?
Well, I just talked about sticks, so I have to think about it a bit more. But I don't know. The first thing that came to mind, like living in a village and being like a very relatively wealthy part of the village, but it's still a village. And coming to a town or a bigger city, being the part of the community of the city will give you different perks than living in a village, but at the same time you will be most likely at the bottom level of the citizen hierarchy, not only because of the wealth, but also because of the social experience between these different communities. Yeah. This is an example.
Yeah.
How good it would be.
Yeah. Please.
I just wanted to add to this that I don't think it's a universal, because in Romanian there's this expression, it's better to be fruntaș la oraș. So it's better to be on top of your village than at the bottom of the town. So that's also a take that so it might not be such a general answer that people.
Yeah, I just thought that like connecting to this theme of jealousy of another group, or maybe outside of your current group, this could be one of the incentives to do it.
So I remembered an example that I think most of us went through. So when you are you are gathering with your family, and you have the children's table and the grown-ups table. And when you're at a certain age, or I don't know, your older cousin gets to the grown-up table because he or she is older than you, then you have the sort of, you remember, I could be there. And then you sort of want to sit with the grown-ups, and as a teenager you sort of want to be treated differently than a kid, to be seen more. So like, this is sort of an example that I think people can relate to.
Yeah.
Okay, because I am a group analyst, I identify with what I do, so this is it. I wanted to say that I think you want to express something else than what you are trying to say loud sticks and being a child. And I will say about my experience as being from Vrancea, from Focșani, which is the Moldavian part of Romania. And when I went to Bucharest to live there, they all were making fun of me. All of them. Like they were saying, when are you going to bring us wine? Because it's a famous area for wine. There is no wine in my city. It's a city. It's not a vineyard, you know? So, and a lot, but for years about my accent, yeah, because it's different than that of Bucharest, yeah, and of, you know how it is, yeah, but you somehow don't speak about it here, yeah, from various reasons, yeah, but I can relate to what you're saying, also because when you spoke about it, I thought that I lived in Italy for a while, and Romanians are also notorious there for their well behaviors, like being thieves and called names. And a lot of times, people were telling me that I look like an Italian, and somehow I had the fantasy that I would present myself as an Italian, you know, because somehow I was ashamed by the fact that I was a Romanian, you know, so it was more easier to integrate, you know. So sometimes I was just pretending I started to think in Italian in order to become an Italian, to be more, you know, to feel like I'm a normal human being who can live in another part of the world and not being ashamed of being my own nationality, identity, and so on. Even if I don't identify as Romanian, I'm identifying myself as a human being, and this is it.
My thoughts on this lead me to throw in a question. It seems to me that some individuals have more of a need than others to categorize people they see into groups, to define these belonging situations. It is very interesting to me, and my question would be is this maybe a need somehow to process the world, or is it maybe a trauma response in some way? Because I see that some people do this more than others.
I'm not taking that. Well, what do you think?
Personally, I agree, but I don't need to think. personally, I totally agree to you, and fortunately or not, in my experience, when I went to communities that were very heterogeneous, I noticed this fact that people are not so into categorizing and looking at you as a human being and not assigning those multiple identities to you. In smaller communities, yes. But I don't know why this is happening. It was one of the reasons that I came here to find out the paradox.
To a certain extent, I think we all have a need to, so whenever we're faced with something we do not know, and a stranger is someone we do not know, I think there is an innate need to try to make sense of things we do not know, that we come across with, and that's why we have boxes that we put everything and everyone into, because we all have boxes. I don't think it's true that you can be completely without the boxes. What you do with those boxes is a completely different story. My other experience is that if you come with some sort of insecurity, whether that be from maybe a rough childhood or a lack of attention from your parents, that's when these things become more, I don't know, pronounced. Because you are trying to hide your vulnerability, you're trying to hide the fact that you have somehow been able to, the fact that you have somehow been wounded, and you do that by labeling and by having this, I don't know, maybe defensive position towards people that are different from you.
I think this belonging to groups and labeling these boxes and putting people into these boxes is sort of coming from a base of trying to stay safe, or like the sense of safety, because when we know something, that's safe. When something unknown comes up, or somebody unknown comes up, that's unsafe, and you do not know how to react to that. You don't know what can it do to you, or what they want to do to you. So like, I think it is very close, or it goes back to the sense of safety that we need to have, and all this belonging sort of thing. I feel like it goes back to the safety.
But in the example I was giving, the unknown person is not an abstract person. They'll have a particular shape, and I will have a response to that. So I don't think we don't meet people in the abstract. So and what I'm, again, social psychologists, the kinds of experiments they've done, you know, put literally a group of people into a room and they will find themselves grouping. Now it seems to be a characteristic that we find ourselves grouping and then differentiating. But even if I am that sort of a human being, you know, where these things don't matter to me so much, I can find myself put into these categories, and then they do start to matter. You know, it's not just my choice, it's also what you are doing to me and what I'm doing to you. So something relational happening, isn't it? And power relational.
Maybe a couple more ideas and we might need to wrap up.
Just a short one. I was thinking why people are grouping the way they are, and most likely they are grouping because they have the smallest differences between them. Like put 10 people in a room, there will be 2-3 groups. Those people will be very similar. Reaching out to the other side is an effort. Like in real life, anybody meets a person whom they don't click at the same minute they meet. It's an effort, and people don't really have that kind of energy every day, like meeting new people at any time to reach out to know that person. And because of that, we use boxes. We use boxes, and even if the boxes are not inherently bad or inherently negative. We use them because a person don't have the energy to know hundreds of people. Like if you read a book and there is a character and he's very well written, you start to know them for a long time, and in the end of the book the writer says that he was black or something. Like you didn't know that until then. It makes no difference because you know the person. You don't put them in a box because of the color of their skin, because you have intimate knowledge with them. You know them. In the real life, the first thing most people is see the person. Immediately put them in a box, and if the box is further away from you than you would like, you won't put the effort in to know that person, and so that box will be going away from you slowly, because you put more people on them, in that box you don't know them, and inherently that pushing away the box.
Who created the box?
I think...
Or what creates the box?
Humans create the box. And I think the box is created starting from the smallest community you are a part of. Because most of the boxes, I think, at the start at least, of a human's life, are learned. Like learned from before, past experiences with other groups of people, and to pull the box closer or to break the box is a really, really hard effort for one individual. To break a box for a group of people, like to break the stereotype, so to say, it's an immensely, almost impossible task, I think.
I was just thinking that it's important we don't think about it as a judgment, but that we just, that's what we do as human beings. And I was just remembering, Farhad, when we were suddenly realizing how we saw some people that looked a bit rough or something, and we automatically thought, oh, they can't think like us or something. And then we came into conversation, and they thought very much like we could have a conversation. It was a shock. Those experiences are shock when you realize what you projected and it's not true. But we do it all the time. So it's more for me, it's more about whether we are open to these shocks and experience and realize what we're doing. To me, that would possibly the thing to make a difference.
Yeah, but that's at a micro level, at a personal level, what you're talking about. Then there's, at a societal level, it's a very different thing again, isn't it? You know, I'm constantly catching myself being very judgmental. You know, I cross somebody in the street, I've dismissed them. And then 2 steps later, I realize what I've done. You know, and then I have to kind of reprocess something. But it's so fast. You know, and despite my ethics and so on, I'm doing it all the time. You know, good person, bad person, very quickly.
But it happens at the micro, individual, in society. But I was thinking about boxes, and I had
sticks and boxes.
Yeah, sticks and boxes, and I had this vision, you know, which is an utopian vision. Okay, maybe we cannot get rid of the boxes. It seems like we cannot. It's something in I don't know. But maybe somehow, and I'm thinking about your generation, which has more, the information for you is more at your reach in a very fast way, which was not in the old times, and this is a true. And I was thinking how maybe the new generation can at least do bigger boxes, you know, in order to be more psychologically flexible, you know, to be more, it is maybe a very used word, this of being open, so it lost its meaning, you know, but being more flexible to find out more perspectives you know, in order, maybe you will do it, because it seems for me that my generation, my parents' generation and so on couldn't, yeah, because it doesn't matter, we will not start talking history right now, but I don't know, but I wanted to say, because I told Christina that meeting you today, it was like, you know, it's like I'm being more optimistic, because I wouldn't have your courage in my 20s to approach an international trainer so directly. I wouldn't have it, because I was raised like you have said, no? You are a child, you don't talk to adults, you know, so my position, even in my 20s, was like, you know, you just say hello, like, you know,
Yeah.
you don't talk like equals with such a great figure, you know, so maybe you will, I hope so.
Just have one more question. You mentioned that complete strangers don't exist because at least one attribute is common. So do you think that there is a minimum number of attributes that needs to be common in order for two people to also not feel strangers?
Question is too abstract.
So
In the sense that you can't generalize that. I don't think you can make a generalized answer to that kind of question.
So there might be attributes that are more, that are kind of worth more, and
Yeah,
some
I mean,
attributes that are not as important.
I might share an attribute that I don't like, for example. You know, just because I share an attribute doesn't mean I'll feel. I might therefore focus on something else to push you further away. So it's too mechanical, that way of talking. You know, how many, like the conversation this morning, you go back to numbers, you know, how many attributes will make it okay? It doesn't work like that. And you can have no attributes and have a, you know, you can fall in love with somebody who's completely mad, wrong person, but something happens. So it's not that rational, whatever it is.
So it is different on a case-by-case basis.
Yeah, I guess.
This inspired an interesting reflection in me that it seems that these boxes are not so static, and they seem to be constantly moving and shifting without stopping, because every moment that one individual feels safe enough or desperate enough to question these boxes, they either get support, and then a natural phenomenon occurs and a new box is born, or they are excluded, and if maybe the excluded person looks around and finds other people who are excluded, and there's our brand new box.
Yeah.
And after this opposition box also gives rise to an individual that questions those attributes, then it seems to me that it's in a constant movement.
Yeah. Yeah.
That's the hope.
But also to answer your first question, that you. The thing is that we cannot not categorize. Our thinking process is a categorization process. It's categorization, arrangement of things. So we are taking process and breaking it up into categories and arranging them. That's our thought. So in that sense, it is an aspect of the human condition and the human mind. We cannot not categorize. Yeah.
So we should be generous. So a positive attitude would be to be forgiving and generous to ourselves and each other for having this trait, this urge to categorize, because it's it's human.
Yeah, I mean, in that sense, that this, when I'm saying about myself, I walk down the road, I've thrown some, dismissed somebody, and then I catch myself, and I'm, have to do something else in myself then. But it happens like this. And even now, as we have sat here together in this half an hour or whatever it is, we have formed belonging groups. There are certain people unconsciously I feel some affinity with. It's the same experience for you because we're all human, So we have formed already subconsciously belonging groups. It's happened.
So maybe it would be an interesting game to do a sociometric play,
Yeah.
to go to the person who moves most spontaneously you are attracted to here, and maybe we would see those groups.
Yeah, absolutely. But you recognize this experience, do you? That you feel an affinity with some of the people sitting here, more affinity, and others not less. So it's happening, even as we're speaking.
What you were saying,
I really like what you were saying because it brings this hope that we have to. Sometimes I think we need to bring love into the equation. That we need to forgive ourselves and others for who we are, that we're human. I just wanted. I forgot what else I wanted to say.
Yeah, I just agree that love is a very important thing in all of this. It's so much easier to forgive your loved ones than people you're not so familiar with, isn't it? Yeah. And I think on that happy note we must end. Thank you so much for coming today. Thank you, Dr. Farhad Dalal and Dr. Anka Simonka for this lovely talk. And we would love to have you back again. So please consider this a possible future invitation.
I'm in.
And thank you all for being here and sharing this experience together.
Yeah, thanks.
You like it?